A 9-year-old billionaire's daughter walked up to the son of her family's housekeeper and asked him one question. She didn't ask the mother. She asked the boy. Yoon Ah stood in the doorway of the small room in the East Wing wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's weekly salary, and she looked at this 11-year-old boy sitting cross-legged on the floor with a comic book across his knees, and she said the thing she had been rehearsing alone in her room for 2 weeks. "Can your mom pretend to be my mom for just one day?" Not a joke. Not a game. Every single word was meant. Chris looked at her for a long time. The comic book was still open across his knees, but he wasn't reading it anymore. He was looking at her the way he looked at things he were taking seriously. She didn't look away. Most people looked away when they said something like that. She didn't. "Why?" he said. She had been ready for him to laugh. She had been ready for him to say that's weird or go ask her yourself or any of the things that would have made it easier to pretend she had been joking. She wasn't ready for why. Because why required a real answer. "Because yours actually looks at you," she said. The room was quiet. "This morning," Yoon Ah continued, "when she fixed your scarf, she looked at you like you were something she didn't want to forget. Like if she looked away too quickly, she might miss something." She paused. "Nobody has ever looked at me like that." Chris didn't say anything right away. That was the thing about him. He never filled silence just to fill it. "She's just fixing a scarf," he said finally, not unkindly. "I know what it looks like from the outside," Yoon Ah said quietly. "It doesn't look like just fixing a scarf from where I'm standing. And if you think this is simply a sad story about a lonely little girl, stay with me, because what happened next would almost cost one woman her job, her income, and the roof over her son's head. And before it was over, it would crack open a family in a way that nobody in that house saw coming. This is that story." Chris put his comic book down. Not dramatically, he just set it to the side, which Yoon Ah had come to understand meant he was actually in the conversation now. "What do you mean nobody looks at you like that?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I have a driver," she said, "and a nutritionist and 4 tutors, and a housekeeper who takes my temperature when I'm sick and logs it in an app." She said it without bitterness, which somehow made it worse. "They're all very good at their jobs. But none of them have ever fixed my scarf." "You could just fix your own scarf." "That's not the point." "I know," he said. "I know that's not the point." They looked at each other across the small room. Outside the window, the Seongbuk-dong Street was quiet the way streets in that neighborhood were always quiet, lined with old trees that had been there longer than anyone could remember. "I'll ask her," Chris said finally. "I already decided to ask her myself," Yoon Ah said. "I just wanted to tell you first." "Why?" She thought about it honestly. "Because you're the one who has what I'm asking for. It seemed right to tell you before I asked for it." Chris picked his comic book back up. He looked at it without reading it. "She's going to want to think about it." "I know. She thinks about everything." "I know that too," Yoon Ah said. "I've been watching." She had been watching for almost 2 years, since the October morning that started everything, collecting moments the way some children collect objects, quietly without telling anyone, building a private catalog of what it looked like when someone was actually present for a child. Arianna had worked in the Park household for 3 years. She was Nigerian, had come to Seoul 7 years ago and stayed when her reasons for coming had dissolved. Her son Chris had been born in Lagos and raised partly in Seoul and had the particular self-possession of a child who learns early that belonging is something you build rather than something handed to you. They lived in the East Wing of the Park residence, accommodation that was part of Arianna's arrangement when she accepted the role. Practical on paper. But it also meant Yoon Ah had spent 2 years living under the same roof as a woman who made her feel, simply by existing nearby, like something was possible that she couldn't fully name. The scarf moment had been the first time she understood what she was missing. She had been standing near the front entrance waiting for her driver when Chris came down the stairs in his school uniform, already moving fast. Arianna appeared from the kitchen hallway at exactly the same moment. She didn't say hurry up. She didn't check her phone. She just reached out and caught him mid-stride and fixed the scarf that had been tucked wrong, one side shorter than the other. She smoothed his collar flat. Then she stepped back and looked at him in a way that had nothing to do with checklists. "Did you eat enough?" Chris was already moving toward the door. "Yes." "Chris." She wasn't quite believing him. He slowed down. "2 pieces of bread." "That's not enough." "Mom." "Side pocket of my bag. Take the biscuits." He took them. He was at the door, but he turned back once quickly in the way you do when you don't want to make it obvious. And she was still watching, and something passed between them that Yoon Ah didn't have a name for. Not words, not even exactly a look. Something closer to an understanding between 2 people who know they will see each other later, and that fact alone is enough. The door closed. Arianna exhaled the way mothers exhale when children leave for school. That small, complicated breath that is equal parts relief and worry. Then she went back to work. Yoon Ah stood at the front entrance for 4 more minutes until her driver arrived. Nobody adjusted her collar. Nobody asked if she ate enough. She'd had a smoothie, prepared by her nutritionist, portioned and logged in an app, delivered to her room at 7:15 by a housekeeper who knocked twice, set it down, and left without speaking. It was objectively a more nutritionally complete breakfast than 2 pieces of bread and biscuits from a side pocket. She understood that. She stood at the entrance and thought about the scarf, about the way Arianna had looked at Chris like she was trying to hold the image of him. And she felt something she didn't have a word for yet. She began collecting moments after that, quietly, without telling anyone. The waiting was one. Arianna stood outside the school gate most afternoons. She waited with the other parents, and when Chris came through the gate, she wasn't looking at her phone. She was looking at the gate. And when she saw him, her whole face did something involuntary, something she didn't choose and probably didn't know she was doing. Yoon Ah was picked up by a driver. He waited in the car with the engine running. She asked Arianna once, pretending to make conversation while passing through the kitchen, whether Chris liked his school. "He loves the library," Arianna said without stopping what she was doing. "He hates football drills because he says he's not coordinated and it embarrasses him in front of the other boys. I told him coordination is a skill you build, not something you're born with. He doesn't believe me yet. He will." She said it the way you say things you know because you were told them, because there is a relationship in which that kind of telling happens naturally without occasion. Yoon Ah nodded and went back upstairs. She sat on her bed, thought, "My father does not know I hate my Wednesday tutor." Then, "I have never told him." Then, "He has never asked." Then she thought about the scarf again. Now, here is where most people get this story completely wrong. They assume Yoon Ah was a passive child waiting to be rescued. She was not. What she did next took more courage than most adults manage. She started asking questions. Chris didn't talk much, but when he did, he always meant it. Yoon Ah figured this out slowly over many Saturday afternoons in the house library. The library was her refuge first. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, mostly her father's business collection, that nobody touched. Along the bottom there were paperbacks and old hardcovers and illustrated encyclopedias from the 90s that were outdated enough to be interesting. She went there when she didn't want to be in her room, but also didn't want to be anywhere that required her to perform being fine. Chris went there because of the comics. Arianna had arranged access for him on weekends through a quiet agreement with another staff member. He would sit in the corner by the window perfectly still and read for hours. The first time Yoon Ah walked in and found him there, she almost left. Then she thought, "This is my library, and he isn't bothering anything." So she took a book from the shelf and sat on the opposite side of the room. They sat in silence for 40 minutes. "The one next to that is better," he said, without looking up. She looked at the book in her hands, looked at the shelf, took the one he meant. He was right. It was considerably better. That was how it started. Over the weeks that followed, she began to understand something about him. He didn't perform. He didn't shape his answers around what she seemed to want to hear. He said what he actually thought, and when he had nothing to say, he said nothing, and neither quality was something she had encountered consistently in the adults around her. She started using this carefully. "Does your mom know when you're upset?" she asked one Saturday. "Even if you don't tell her?" He considered it properly, the way she had noticed he considered things. "Usually, yeah." "How?" "She just does, the way I come in from school, whether I want food straight away or not. She says I go quiet in a different way." Yoon Ah turned this over slowly. "There are different kinds of quiet?" "She thinks so." She sat with that for a long moment. She had nannies over the years. Professional, kind, rotating through as her needs changed. They checked on her at correct intervals, made sure she was fed and clean and progressing on schedule. Not one of them had ever noticed she was quiet in a different way. "Does she ever get it wrong?" Yoon Ah asked. "Yeah. Sometimes she thinks I'm upset when I'm just tired. She makes tea and wants to talk about it, and I have to explain that nothing actually happened." "That sounds annoying." He shrugged. "It's fine." The way he said it was not dismissive. It was the voice of someone who has understood that being incorrectly worried about is a form of being loved and has made a quiet peace with it. Yoon Ah looked at the book in her lap. She hadn't been reading it for a while. I would take that, she thought. Being worried about incorrectly. I would take that without hesitating. She started asking Arianna directly after that. She had learned from watching that real conversations with adults couldn't be announced. You had to arrive sideways, catch them mid-task, and let the question come in naturally. Arianna was reorganizing the pantry one Saturday afternoon, a task she said she genuinely enjoyed, which Yoon Ah found confusing and oddly comforting at the same time. Yoon Ah sat on the kitchen counter nearby, holding a tablet she wasn't looking at. "Do mothers stay awake when their children are sick?" she asked. Arianna kept moving items along the shelf, not making a production of the question. "Depends on the illness. Depends on the mother." "But do they check? In the night?" "Yes, or they sleep in the same room so they can hear." Yoon Ah looked at the dark tablet screen. "Mine doesn't." A pause. Arianna kept her hands moving, her face calm, the space between them comfortable. She didn't turn around and make it a moment. She just let the words settle where they landed. "When you're sick," Arianna said carefully, "what happens?" "The housekeeper takes my temperature. There's a procedure." Yoon Ah heard how that sounded out loud. "It's fine. There's a doctor on call." "That's good." Arianna's voice stayed even, but the reorganizing slowed just fractionally. "My mom lives in London," Yoon Ah said. "My dad lives here. They don't—" She stopped. Tried again. "It's not a bad situation. They're both very busy people." "You don't need to explain it." "I know." Silence settled between them. Arianna. Do you actually worry about Chris? Not check on him. Actually worry?" Arianna turned then. She looked at Yoon Ah with full attention, the way she sometimes looked at Chris, like she was seeing something that required her to be completely present. "Yes," she said simply. "Constantly. It's genuinely exhausting. I would not recommend it." She turned back to the shelf, and because she turned back, because she kept it light, Yoon Ah could breathe again. "What do you worry about?" "Whether he's eating enough, whether the boys at school are decent to him, whether I'm teaching him the right things without knowing I'm also teaching him the wrong ones at the same time, whether he'll be all right when I'm not there to see it." She moved a tin to a higher shelf. "Whether I say too much or not enough, whether staying awake at night to check on him is more for him or more for me." "That sounds like a lot." "It is." "Does he know that you worry that much?" Arianna smiled at the shelf, at something private. "Probably not the full extent of it." "That's probably wise." Yoon Ah sat quietly for a moment. Then she said the thing she had been sitting on since the beginning of the conversation. "I think I might be one of the least worried about children in this entire city." She hadn't meant to say it out loud, but it was already there. Arianna didn't spin around, didn't rush to correct her. She just stayed at the shelf, hands still, and let the words have their full weight. "The pantry looks much better," Yoon Ah said finally. "It does," Arianna said. "Thank you for witnessing." Yoon Ah almost smiled. "You're welcome." She asked Chris the following Saturday whether his mother ever talked to him about worrying. "She told me once that worrying is just love with nowhere to go yet," he said, not looking up from his book. Yoon Ah repeated it quietly. "Love with nowhere to go yet." I thought it was a strange thing to say at first. And now? Now I think I get it. Yoon Ah thought about all the love that might exist somewhere. In London, in a business calendar, in a procedure and a doctor on call. Love with nowhere to go yet. She wondered if that was what it was. She decided she couldn't know, and not knowing had its own particular weight. She found Arianna in the garden on a Sunday afternoon. Not the main garden, which was formal and felt like somewhere nothing was allowed to be touched. The narrow side passage near the east wing, with the old wooden bench and the bougainvillea that had gone slightly wild because nobody had scheduled it for attention. It was the only outdoor space in the property where staff could sit without being visible from the main windows. Chris was already there. Comic book open. Yoon Ah had not planned this. She had been building a careful, composed version of this request for 2 weeks. She had it ready. It didn't sound desperate. It was the safe version. She walked around the corner and found both of them, and the safe version fell apart. She stood at the entrance. They both looked up. "I wanted to ask you something," she said to Arianna. "I was going to find a better moment, but—" She stopped. "Chris already knows what I'm going to say." Arianna looked at Chris. Chris looked at his comic book. "I think he's been waiting for me to say it to you," Yoon Ah said. "I think?" Chris neither confirmed nor denied this. "What did you want to ask?" Arianna said gently. Yoon Ah looked at her and the safe version felt dishonest. She let it go. "Can you pretend to be my mother? Just for 1 day? It doesn't have to be a large thing. I just want to know what it feels like. Someone fixing your scarf, asking if you ate enough, and meaning it. I know it isn't real. I'm not confused about what's real. I just want to be inside it for 1 day." Silence. The bougainvillea moved in the afternoon breeze. Arianna was looking at her with something Yoon Ah couldn't fully name. Not pity. She knew pity well enough to recognize it. Not discomfort exactly. Something more like a person holding several serious things in their mind simultaneously, trying to find solid ground underneath all of them. "Can I think about it?" Arianna said. Yoon Ah nodded immediately. "Yes, of course." "I didn't say no." "I know." "I said I need to think." "Okay." Yoon Ah looked at Chris, who had returned to his comic, which she understood now was his way of giving people room without leaving the room. "Thank you for hearing it," she said. She left the way she came. Arianna sat in that passage for a long time after. The food in her hands went cold. She was working through the consequences the way she always worked through things that mattered, one by one, methodically. And the loudest thought was not, should I do this? It was, what does this cost me if I do? And this is where the story changes completely, because there was something happening in that house that Yoon Ah knew absolutely nothing about. Something that had been building quietly for months, and it was about to come for everything. Arianna told Chris that night. She sat on the edge of his bed while he finished his homework. This was something she had always done, talked to him about real things. Not the heaviest things, not the ones that were hers alone to carry, but the real things. She believed a child should understand that adults had costs to their choices, that doing the right thing was not always the safe thing. "I need to explain why I didn't say yes today." He put his pen down and looked at her. "You know Ms. Han, the one who smiles like she's calculating something." Arianna almost smiled herself. "Yes, her. She manages Mr. Park's professional schedule, the household appointments, Yoon Ah's academic calendar. She has his ear in a way that comes with years of proximity and usefulness." "Okay." She has a cousin, has been positioning her for months. She wants her cousin placed in my role, and I believe she has been looking actively, deliberately, for a reason to bring a formal complaint to Mr. Park. Chris set his pen down completely. What kind of reason? Overstepping, getting too familiar with the family. Arianna chose the next word carefully. Presumptuous. What does that mean exactly? Acting as though you have been given more rights than you actually have. He thought about it the way he thought about everything, turning it over fully before responding. But Yoon Ah asked you. She came to you first. Yes. So you didn't overstep. She approached you. That's true, but Ms. Han is very good at framing things differently. If she went to Mr. Park and described a staff member who had inserted herself into his daughter's emotional life for ambiguous reasons, and if her cousin's credentials were already sitting in a folder ready to be presented, that would be a lie. It would be a version of events. Would it work? Arianna looked at her son. It might. Chris was quiet for a long moment. She asked you because you're the only person in that house who makes her feel like she actually exists. You're not inserting yourself. You're just there. You're the only one who's actually there. Arianna said nothing. Maybe she just wants one good memory. He said it simply, clearly. Not a push, not a command. The kind of observation that lands differently when it comes from a child who has no reason to say it, except that it's true. Arianna looked at him for a long moment. If I do this, she said slowly, we keep it contained. One day. Everything stays visible and normal. Nothing that can be made to look unusual to someone who wasn't there. Chris nodded. And if Ms. Hain finds out, maybe she won't. Maybe. Arianna stood and turned off his lamp. At the doorway, she paused. You know what frightens me most? Not the job, not even Ms. Han. It's making the wrong call on something that costs someone else more than it costs me. She looked at the dark hallway. If I say no, it costs Yoon Ah. If I say yes, it might cost us both. I have to decide which cost I can actually carry. You already know what you're going to do, Chris said quietly. You just needed to say it out loud first. She stood in the doorway for one more moment. Go to sleep, she said. But he was right. She already knew. She told Yoon Ah yes on Wednesday, quietly, without ceremony, in the hallway outside the kitchen. Saturday, just Saturday. We keep it simple, nothing unusual, just a normal day. Okay, Yoon Ah said, then thank you. In a voice doing its absolute best to sound like no particular thing and not managing it at all. Saturday arrived. Arianna started early. She made breakfast herself, not the formal breakfast usually prepared for Yoon Ah by the kitchen staff, but a simpler version. Eggs, toast, fruit cut into imprecise pieces. She called up the stairs the way she called for Chris. Not an intercom, not a message relayed through staff. Her voice traveling through the house on its own. Yoon Ah, breakfast. A pause, then footsteps. Yoon Ah appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, hair pulled in 3 different directions from sleep, looking like someone who had been waiting for this and was now slightly afraid it had actually arrived. Sit. Arianna pointed at the chair beside Chris, who was already eating while reading, which Arianna disapproved of and had decided to release today. Yoon Ah sat. The plate went in front of her. Arianna looked at Yoon Ah's hair and said, After breakfast hair. Yoon Ah touched it self-consciously. It's fine. It isn't after breakfast. Nothing more was said. But Yoon Ah looked at the plate in front of her and something in her face shifted. Something that had been held in a particular tight, practiced position for a very long time quietly, without announcement, let go. Chris ate his eggs. He didn't comment. He understood exactly what this morning was. After breakfast, hair. Arianna sat Yoon Ah down and worked through it section by section. No rushing, no making her feel like a task being completed. She talked while she worked, not about anything structural, about whether the weather would hold, about whether Chris would finish his comic series before the month ended, about whether Yoon Ah preferred this style or something different. Yoon Ah answered in short sentences at first, then longer ones. Then, without realizing it had happened, she was talking almost without stopping. About school, about the Wednesday tutor she found dull, about a book she had read 3 times because she had nobody to discuss it with, about Seoul in winter versus Seoul in summer and which one felt more like home. Arianna asked the follow-up question every time, the one most adults skip because they are already composing their next response or thinking about the next task. She just kept asking the next question, like Yoon Ah's answers mattered, like there was nowhere else to be. The morning moved through a board game with missing pieces replaced by buttons from the sewing drawer. Lunch took twice as long as it should have because all 3 of them were making it together, and the result was uneven and loud, and the kitchen smelled like effort, and something that had been missing from that house for a long time. Then the moment that almost broke everything. Mid-afternoon. Clara, the housekeeper who had been with the Park household for 6 years, came through the main living area with fresh linens. She stopped in the doorway of the room where all 3 of them were resetting the board. She looked at Arianna. 1 beat too long. Everything going smoothly in here? Perfectly. Arianna's voice was light, easy, unbothered. Clara nodded and moved on. Arianna continued resetting the board without pausing, but she registered every detail of that exchange, the slight hesitation, the quality of the nod. Clara was not unkind. Clara also reported things, not from malice but from a deep professional instinct that information shared upward was the same as doing her job correctly. She would need to be more careful. The afternoon became evening. Dinner was made together. The sauce came out too salty. The rice was perfect. They argued cheerfully about which one overruled the other. The kitchen was warm and the house was louder than it had been in months. At dinner, Yoon Ah turned to ask Arianna something, and the word that came first, before she could reach for a different one, was, "Mom." She stopped. The word sat in the air between all of them. Arianna did not flinch, did not freeze, did not look toward the door. She looked at Yoon Ah with a completely steady face. "Yes," she said. Yoon Ah swallowed. "The salt. Could you pass it?" Arianna passed the salt. Chris was very focused on his rice. The word had been reflexive, accidental. It had also been the most honest thing said in that house in a very long time. Clara had been closer to the dining room than Arianna realized. She had sharp ears, and she had heard it. By Sunday morning, she had told Ms. Han. She framed it the way she framed most things, as something she felt a responsible person in Ms. Han's position should be aware of. She mentioned the full day, the kitchen, the board game, the closeness of it, and then she mentioned the word she had heard at the dinner table. Ms. Han asked 4 questions, calmly, in the manner of someone who already knows the answers will be useful. She spent Sunday evening constructing her approach with the same precision she brought to everything. She did not lie in her notes. She was too careful for that. She arranged facts that were all technically accurate in an order that pointed cleanly toward a conclusion she had already decided on. Employee operating outside her defined role. Personal relationship developed with the child without parental knowledge or consent. Child addressing the employee in familial terms at the dinner table. Each item documented. Each item real. The arrangement of them was the deception. At the bottom of her summary, attached almost as an afterthought, was a credentials file. Her cousin's qualifications, references, proposed salary. It had been prepared 6 weeks ago. On Monday morning, she requested a meeting with Mr. Park. He could see her Tuesday. Mr. Park, J. Won Park, was not what anyone would accurately describe as a negligent father. He had clear opinions about Yoon Ah's education. He reviewed her academic reports. He had structured her development with considerable deliberate thought and hired excellent people for every dimension of it. What he had never examined, what no one had pointed out, and what he had not thought to question was whether knowing about a child and knowing a child were the same thing. They are not the same thing. He received Miss Han on Tuesday morning in his study. She presented her case in the composed, regretful tone of someone doing something difficult because duty requires it. Appropriate boundaries, professional responsibility, Yoon Ah's well-being as the foremost concern. He listened carefully. Was Yoon Ah distressed? He asked. On the contrary, she seemed very comfortable, which is precisely the concern. That level of attachment to a household employee suggests appropriate professional distance has not been maintained. What would you have had her do when my daughter asked her? A pause. That was not the question Ms. Han had prepared for. I would have redirected Yoon Ah toward more appropriate. Send Arianna in, he said. I can remain to provide full context. Thank you, Ms. Han. Send her in. Alone for 3 minutes, Mr. Park did not check his phone or review papers. He was trying to remember the last time Yoon Ah had used the word mom for anyone. Her mother visited 4 times a year. He searched for a single recent occasion on which he had heard his daughter use that word in this house, in this city. He could not find one. He was not angry. This surprised him. He had expected to be. What he was, sitting behind his desk in the quiet of a Tuesday morning, was something that had no clean professional vocabulary, something that felt like finally seeing a gap you have walked past so many times it became invisible, and then suddenly, without warning, seeing it with complete clarity. Arianna had known since Sunday. She had read it in the way Clara moved on too quickly during a hallway interaction on Monday. She had felt it in the texture of the day, that specific absence of small, normal friction that tells you something is coming. She had not slept much. She walked into the study with her back straight and her hands still. Ms. Han stood to the left of the desk, arms folded, wearing the expression of someone performing reluctance very carefully. Sit down, Mr. Park said. Arianna sat. Arianna, this conversation is about, Ms. Han began. I'll direct it. Mr. Park said it quietly. Absolutely. Ms. Han adjusted. I've been told, he said to Arianna, that you spent last Saturday with Yoon Ah, that it was intended in some form to replicate a maternal experience, that this was something she requested from you. Is that correct? Yes. No elaboration, no softening. She had decided in the hours before this meeting that she would not apologize and would not reduce what had happened into something more defensible than it actually was. She would tell the truth at exactly the size it was. Whose idea was it? Yoon Ah approached me directly. She spoke to Chris first, I believe, to determine whether it was a reasonable thing to ask. Then she came to me. What did she ask for exactly? She asked if I could show her what it felt like, to have someone notice her, fix her scarf, ask if she had eaten enough and mean it. She told me she knew it wasn't real. She said she wasn't confused about what was real. She just wanted to know what it felt like to be inside that for one day. The room held the silence. She called you Mom, Mr. Park said. He said it directly to Arianna, like a man testing the weight of something he wasn't sure he was ready to hold. Once. By accident. She caught herself immediately. I passed the salt and moved on. He looked at her for a long moment. Do you understand why I'm sitting here having this conversation? I understand why it looks the way it looks from outside. Is there a distinction worth making? Arianna looked at him directly, fully, without performing composure, with actual composure, which is a different thing entirely. Your daughter is 9 years old, sir. She is not confused about reality. She knows exactly who I am and what my position is in this house. She knows Chris is my son. She asked for one day. Not a replacement family, not a permanent arrangement. One day of being seen by someone who wasn't seeing her as a line item on a schedule. Nothing moved in the room. She didn't come to me asking for things. She walked to where my son was sitting with his comic book and she asked whether she was allowed to be loved. That was the real question underneath everything she said, and I looked at her and I thought, what exactly am I protecting if I say no to that? Mr. Park did not speak. Ms. Han drew breath. "Wait outside," he said. "Why, both of you. Please." He sat alone. He opened the household security system. Cameras covering all common areas installed 2 years ago. He rarely used it. He opened it now. He found Saturday. He watched the kitchen in the morning. Arianna at the stove. Chris at the table with his book. Yoon Ah appearing in the doorway in her pajamas. He watched the moment the plate was set in front of his daughter. He rewound it, watched it again. The way her face changed, not dramatically, not in a way that would be obvious to someone who didn't know her. Just something releasing. Something that had been held in one position for a very long time, quietly finding somewhere else to be. He sat with that image for a while. He moved forward to dinner. He watched Yoon Ah start to say a word and stop. He watched Arianna pass the salt, as though the most ordinary thing in the world had just occurred. He closed the screen. Then he opened the document Ms. Han had attached to the bottom of her summary. The credentials file. He looked at the date it was created. 6 weeks ago. He pressed the intercom. "Get me HR and pull Ms. Han's complete employment file." By Thursday it was done. A settlement, a notice period, a reference that was accurate and complete and said nothing about Tuesday. Ms. Han's cousin received a brief professional email explaining the position was no longer available. He didn't frame it to himself as punishment. He framed it as correcting his own error first. He had hired someone capable and efficient who had spent years being useful while building quietly toward her own agenda, and he had not been paying the kind of attention that would have let him see the difference. That was his failure. He was prepared to own it. It was not, he had come to understand that week, his only one. He cleared his full schedule for Saturday, the entire day. He found Arianna in the side garden that same Thursday afternoon. The narrow passage, the bench, the bougainvillea. He stood at the entrance and she looked up, and he could see that she had been waiting for the worst version of this conversation and hadn't fully stopped waiting. "Sit down," she said, then caught herself. "Please, if you'd like." He sat on the bench. "Ms. Han is no longer with us. I want you to know that first." He paused. "I reviewed the Saturday footage before I made any decisions." "The cameras?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I watched Yoon Ah come downstairs for breakfast." He didn't continue immediately. He was a man fluent in the language of strategy and outcomes and decisions. The other language, the one this garden and this moment required, came with more difficulty. "I didn't know she was that lonely." He said it plainly, not as self-punishment, as fact. "I watched my daughter's face when someone called her name from the bottom of the stairs, and I saw something I should have seen a long time ago and didn't." Arianna waited. "I believed that providing well for her was the same as being present for her. I told myself that if her needs were met and her development was on track, then I was doing my job as her father." "I was not." He looked at the garden wall. "Those are not the same thing. I had made myself believe they were because it was more convenient than examining the alternative." The bougainvillea moved above them. "What did she say to you?" he asked, "when she explained what she wanted?" "She didn't say very much. I mostly listened." "Tell me what you heard." Arianna thought about the pantry, the different kinds of quiet, love with nowhere to go yet. She told him carefully, without editorializing, the way you give someone information that is theirs to carry and then step back. He sat with it for a long time. "I know how to construct systems," he said finally. "I know how to place the right people around a problem. But my daughter asked for someone to fix her scarf, and it should have been me she felt she could say that to." "She wanted it to be you," Arianna said carefully. "She just didn't have a way to say it to you directly yet. She came to me because I was safe enough to practice on." Safe enough to practice on. That is not a small thing. It means she hasn't stopped trying. A child who has truly given up doesn't practice. They just go flat. She paused. Yoon Ah is not flat. She is still reaching. You have time? He looked at his hands. Tell me specifically what to do, he said. Not the theory. What do I actually do? Arianna looked at this man who ran companies and sat on boards and moved through Seoul with the particular confidence of someone the city had decided to reward, asking her how to be in a room with his own daughter. You show up, she said. That is the first thing and the most important thing. You show up and you are physically present and your phone is not in your hand. Then you stop filling silences with useful things. You let the silence be there and you wait inside it. When she says something that sounds small to you, you treat it as large, because to her it is large. Everything she says to you right now is large. She doesn't know yet that you want to hear it. He nodded slowly. At night you go up to her room. Not the housekeeper, not a staff member. You. You knock on the door and you ask if she needs anything. It doesn't matter if she says no, the knock is the point. The showing up is the point. You do it when she's sick. You do it when she isn't sick. You do it until she starts expecting it. That is when it becomes real to her. How long before she trusts it? As long as it takes. She will test it. She will say she's fine when she isn't, to see if you still come. Come anyway, every time, without making her feel tested. Just come. They sat in the narrow garden until the light changed above the bougainvillea. Saturday came. Mr. Park knocked on Yoon Ah's bedroom door at 9 in the morning. She opened it in her pajamas, looking like she was expecting information about a schedule change. I thought we could go out today, he said. Just the two of us. You choose where. She looked at him for a long moment, long enough that he almost filled the silence. He didn't. She chose a bookshop in Insadong, the kind with narrow aisles and uneven floors and books stacked in ways that suggested organization had been attempted and affectionately abandoned. He did not look at his phone once. He followed her through the aisles and let her lead. When she stopped at a shelf and picked up a book and started explaining what it was about, he listened to the full explanation without finishing her sentences or checking the time. She chose 3 books. He bought all 3 without comment. In the car going home, she was quiet for a while. The Seoul streets moved past the windows. Then she said, Appa. He said. This was good. Yes, he said. It was. He looked out the window. Something in his face moved without his permission. The kind of thing that happens when you have been holding something carefully for a very long time and you finally, without planning to, let it go slightly. 6 months later, Yoon Ah called Arianna auntie. It had arrived gradually, the way things arrive when they are not pushed, by small increments until one day the word was simply there. True, comfortable, describing something that had quietly become real. Chris joined the school writing club. He came home after the first session quieter than usual, but in the good way, the way Arianna had learned to read. She made tea. She didn't ask. He told her eventually. He always did. Mr. Park knocked on Yoon Ah's door on a Tuesday night when she was not sick and had no particular occasion. She said she was fine. He said, okay. He sat on the edge of her bed for 10 minutes anyway and asked about the book she was reading. She told him. He asked a question about it. She answered. He asked another. He came back on Thursday. She started leaving the book on the nightstand where he could see the cover. One afternoon, Yoon Ah found Chris in the side garden and sat down beside him. The bougainvillea was going wild again. Nobody had gotten around to addressing it. After a while, she said, Can your mom pretend to be my mom for just one day? Chris looked up from his book. Yoon Ah was smiling. It was a joke now, a joke because it referenced something that was behind them. Something that had changed shape from a desperate private question rehearsed alone in a room into a memory they were both old enough to look at directly. The kind of joke you can only make about something that no longer has the power to hurt you. She's your auntie, Chris said. You can't have both. What if it's just the scarf, a very small amount, just the scarf part? She'll say it's fine. It's not fine. Look at it. Chris looked at the scarf, looked back at his book. It's fine. It is absolutely... Arianna's voice came from somewhere inside the house, traveling easily through the afternoon air, finding them in the garden the way it always did. "Yoon Ah, come in for lunch." They both looked up toward the sound. Yoon Ah stood. She turned back once, still smiling. Chris was almost smiling too, which anyone who knew him understood was significant. She went inside. Lunch was ready, made by someone who knew she didn't like the sauce too sharp and never needed to be reminded. Someone would ask if she ate enough. Someone upstairs on a Saturday with a clear calendar would knock on her door that evening just to check. Not because it was on a list, not because a protocol required it, because it had become the kind of thing that happened in this house now, between these people, without anyone needing to announce it. Outside in the narrow passage, the bougainvillea was going a little wild. Nobody had gotten around to cutting it back, and that was perfectly fine. If this story stayed with you, take 1 second right now and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you are new here, subscribe. Because we tell stories exactly like this every single week. Stories about ordinary people making quiet choices that change everything. Like this video if Arianna's courage meant something to you. And drop a comment below. Tell us about someone in your life who showed up for you the way she showed up for Yoon Ah. We read every single comment, and sometimes your comment becomes our next story.